being half Japanese in Japan is quite the interesting situation. As some of you may or may not know, my brother and I are both Hafus, and while he does pull more of the other half, I pull more of the Japanese. In most cases here, whenever we interact with somebody who is Nihonjin or a native born Japanese person, a lot of times the interaction goes directly to me because I pull more of the Asian, and a lot of times they kind of avoid eye contact with my brother. And in the beginning, this was definitely bothersome to me because I am the lacking one as far as Japanese language goes. So it's really important that they talk to my brother because he has a better understanding of the language. And being the older brother I am a little bit overprotective of him. So I was getting a little frustrated that people weren't giving him the time of day. But as time progressed, I kind of realized that it's not necessarily a sense of like racism. It's more of a sense of just confusion or just not knowing. In a lot of history, Japan has been a very closed off country and not letting a lot of visitors in for a really long period of time. And so I think that had a lot of detrimental effects on the people, or at least the older generation here. And while I can honestly say that since we've been living in Japan, we haven't experienced any like racial discrimination, there's just been a lot of confusion of why we're here or what we are, basically. From my brother's aspect, because he doesn't look Japanese, he pretty much just doesn't get spoken to, or they'll immediately go to English with him. And in a lot of cases, if we're like at a restaurant, even if he's the one speaking, they'll be looking at me when they respond or if they ask questions, which I think is really funny because I end up just answering them in English and telling him that he's the one that speaks better Japanese. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, when they do talk to me specifically and I'm unable to respond to them, they give me this look of maybe disappointment or extreme confusion. I assume this is because they're judging the book at its face. I look Japanese, my last name is Japanese, so you would assume that I do speak Japanese. And while I am in the learning phase, I can understand what they're telling me. I'm just not at the point where I can actually respond to them, or at least not respond to them in a cognitive way. But I think this adds to their confusion of like, what is going on? Why is this Japanese person not able to speak Japanese? But I think as time progresses and more visitors come to Japan and more of the Japanese people travel to other places in the world, I think the open-mindedness, quote unquote, is becoming much more apparent in especially the big cities like Tokyo. And please don't get me wrong in this video, I'm not saying that by any means it's a race issue. It's just a matter of just not understanding the situation as a whole. Especially when you're in the Inaka like where we're at, people assume that the people living there are from Japan. And when you have this Japanese person or looking Japanese person living next to you and you speak to them and they have no idea what you're saying in return, I can see where the confusion can come from. There are also a lot of cultural practices that Westerners like ourselves don't really practice in general. So that also I think adds to the confusion. And one of like the most important aspects of Japanese culture is the bow. You know, if I were to bow to somebody in America, they would probably look at me relatively strange, or I'm not sure actually what the reaction would be. But here, a gentle bow is kind of requested or desired. You bow to say thank you, you bow to say excuse me, you bow when you're crossing the road, you bow pretty much for everything. And that's just part of the culture. And while it's a simple act, a lot of Westerners or people who move here, they just don't do it because it's not what they're used to. And so I think that creates a bigger divide in the cultural aspect. But so far, like I've said in my other videos, every person that we've met so far in Japan has been truly amazing. They've been very inquisitive about why I'm Japanese and I don't speak Japanese. They've been very inquisitive like where we've come from. And a lot of them are like, why are you living here? As if it's like some horrible place to live, which is pretty crazy to have that mindset. But what I wanted to get to at the point of this video is the fact that the issue is only an issue if you make it. There's a lot of people on this, social media platforms that say like, oh, they got discriminated against because of they're not Japanese. And to a degree, maybe that is true. But you are living in a place that has its own cultures, its own language, its own ways of doing things, and you're coming in as a guest. So you really can't expect the people who are born here, who have their own way of doing things, to immediately understand where you're coming from. And so it's your job as like an emissary or whatever to kind of educate them about your way of doing things, but you also have to respect the way of life that they have here. So, for those of you moving here who are not Japanese, or for those of you who are half, please expect some type of confusion or maybe apprehension in regards to interaction with you. And while this might not be accurate for every situation, I do believe that the way you treat the people around you will result in the way that they treat you back. So if you're accommodating to being understanding to their position, in a lot of ways, the people here are accommodating to yours. But yeah, so life here as a hafu is pretty interesting, I'm not gonna lie. But overall, I wouldn't have any much complaints about it. I encourage all of you to explore new cultures, new traditions, and just new ways of life. So until the next one, goodbye!